Kia ora te koutou, Marky here, Marky the Demystificator, and today I want to demystify a potentially quite complex topic which is very dear to my heart, and that is neurodiversity or neurodivergence. And these may be terms that you've not heard before, but you're probably familiar with the topic because the likelihood is that you or somebody that is very close to you suffers from, maybe suffer isn't the right word, this is something that we'll discuss, has dyslexia, has attention deficit disorder, has a place on the what we now call the autistic spectrum, which could include Asperger's syndrome or high functioning autism. Dyscalculia, which is a lesser known one, that's a numeric form of dyslexia. Dysgraphia, which is a bit like, it's closer to dyslexia, but it's a form of, mainly shows itself in difficulty with handwriting. And dyspraxia. And Tourette's syndrome, interestingly, kind of comes close to this. And this also has lots of interesting implications with other things, like, for example, transgender, which we know very little about. Which we're only beginning to learn about. There's a little shake there. That wasn't an earthquake, by the way. I was experimenting with propping up my camera with an in tray to make it a little bit higher, and so I'm shaking it deliberately. I'm being naughty. I had I don't know if it's an energy drink or not. Somebody gave me a can of something called Mountain Dew, and I don't know if that's kind of one of these uber caffeinated things, but I was thirsty and I drank it and it was very nice, so maybe slightly manic presentation on this video. Which kind of fits, and I'm allowed to have a manic presentation or a crazy presentation or a off-the-wall presentation because I suffer from ADHD, and we'll get more into that a little bit later on. So, if I haven't lost you already with this kind of very strange preamble, what I want to talk about is a range of conditions that for me come under the umbrella of the terms neurodiversity or neurodivergence. So an individual would describe themselves as neurodivergent, and if you're talking about the wider topic, you would talk about neurodiversity, and you could also use the term neurodiverse. So I could say to you, I am neurodiverse because I am. What does that mean? I'll just break it down to a very simple form, which is what I like to do. That's what demystifying is all about. Neuro is to do with the brain and the nerve cells and neurons, anything neurological, but mainly it relates to the brain. And diverse means different. So what this is about is a range of conditions that used to be called, and still are unfortunately in lots of circles, developmental disorders, that a lot of people these days are now saying, oh, hang on a minute, is this actually a disorder? Is this not just a difference? And diversity, divergent means different. So what we mean is a different brain, a difference in the brain. Not necessarily a problem, not necessarily a fault, not necessarily an illness, not necessarily a disorder, but a difference. Okay. Now this term was, and still is, first used by a wider community of people to cover a wider scope of different conditions, including things like schizophrenia and bipolar disorder. Now, I have no issue with this whatsoever, or with this particular movement or lobby, because it is quite a political movement. I haven't got a great interest in that either, not through lack of caring, but because I don't have particular expertise in things like schizophrenia and bipolar. I have some passing knowledge of it, and I've worked with people with those conditions, but they're not the fields that I'm directly and particularly interested in. But I am very interested in the ones that I have named. So I'm interested in, so it's the DISs, which kind of means disorder. So the dyslexia, dyspraxia, dysgraphia, dyscalculia, and then it's ADHD and the autistic spectrum. And also Tourette syndrome, funny enough, seems to, if it's not a neurodiversity, it tends to co-occur with the other neurodiversities. So that's what we're talking about. We're talking about, in this instance, for me, a very fairly narrow range of neurological differences. Used to be called disorders. Why do we call them differences and not disorders? Well, this is kind of a controversial one, really. And I think the bottom line is that these things do bring difficulties. They do bring often a lot of suffering and a lot of struggle. Arguably, the struggle and the difficulty is not caused by the illness, but is caused by society's failure to take account for people's differences. But you could kind of argue the other way. You could argue that some of these things are disabilities. I kind of think there are a few grey areas. So, for example, I'll talk about myself. I suffer from, among other things, and I'll go through the whole gamut with you in a short while. But among other things, I suffer from dyspraxia. Dyspraxia used to be called clumsy child syndrome. So people with dyspraxia have difficulties with motor skills, and they also have some difficulties with organisation, various other things. What you'll find is that these conditions often overlap. So there's some of the things like being disorganised, that can overlap with being on the autistic spectrum. It's difficult to see where one neurodiverse condition ends and another begins. But one of the main things of dyspraxia is lack of coordination, difficulty with motor skills. So, you know, you're not good at sport. For example, when I smoked, I could never roll up a cigarette. Never for the life of me could I roll up a cigarette. So is dyspraxia purely a disability? Does it bring positives with it? I don't know. I know certainly people make the case that people with dyspraxia often have more quirky personalities and often think differently, and I guess that's distinctly a possibility. So these conditions, arguably, not just illnesses, but kind of areas where you have deficits, and in some cases you have superpowers. Some of these things bring superpowers with them, and we'll get more into this as we go. It's quite a complex subject. I'm going to finish now. One of the things I need to do at the moment is make the videos very short because I'm having difficulty uploading longer videos. So this is going to be a part one, and I will follow with a series of shorter videos, and we'll go into each one of these different conditions briefly. I'm not an expert on any one of them, and the implications of them, and there's lots of different interesting little tangential avenues that we can go down as well. So it's a really fascinating subject. I love this. So not just because I have neurodiversity, but I've worked extensively with people with neurodiversities, and I'm passionate about this because I think we could actually make the world a whole better place by recognising neurodiversity, and we can actually change the world and make people's lives so much better. But enough for now. I will see you again in part 2.